This is NoWeedIllinois.com. I'm Monty Larrick. No Weed Illinois opposes the legalization of today's high-potency marijuana for recreational use. And we're encouraging voters to ask their state lawmakers to vote no on marijuana. Lawmakers could act on marijuana as early as January. In the meantime, NoWeedIllinois.com is offering several presentations about the negative impact that high-potency marijuana is having in states where it is legal. I'm joined by Dr. Karen Randall, MD. She's an emergency room physician in Pueblo, Colorado, a state that legalized pot 5 years ago. She's trained in pediatrics and family practice and holds a certificate in Cannabis Science and Medicine from the University of Vermont. Dr. Randall works out of one of the busiest emergency departments in Colorado. And Dr. Randall, a big reason for that, why it is so busy, is marijuana.
That's right. I'm trained in emergency medicine, and I spent 18 years in Detroit and moved to Colorado only to experience the start of legalizing marijuana. And we've had many ER visits and problems and issues related to the legalization of marijuana.
Many marijuana-related visits to the ER. Who's coming in?
We see, you would be amazed, from babies to senior citizens. So it's all age groups. There's no age group that's eliminated from this.
Babies to senior citizens. And are they being treated for what? Psychosis, cardiac arrest, what?
So we'll talk a little bit about that later, but there are psychosis. There are some cardiovascular problems, hyperemesis induced by cannabinoids, overdoses, accidental ingestions, those kind of things. We're seeing all of those.
Wow. And you're just flooded with people coming into the ER because of marijuana.
We've had a marked increase in our visits, correct. Yeah.
Wow. And we were told, or I'm assuming the people of Colorado were told, that this new era, today's marijuana, is going to be safe. It's going to be very well regulated. And we might as well just go ahead and legalize it because everybody's using it anyway.
Correct. And legalization here was promised that we would have a decrease in the black market. We would have regulated products, and that's not the case. And each state has its own set of laws and regulations with regards to marijuana laws. Our state is, I would think, fairly lax when you compare it to the regulations in Washington or Oregon, but we've seen all kinds of issues that were probably a large part unforeseen.
Okay. Well, you have a presentation and several, we'll call them slides for this, for our purposes. So let's get started with that.
Okay.
Here we go. Disclosures.
So I don't make any money from the cannabis industry, and I don't have any shares or stocks, and I really don't even make money to speak out, but I am speaking out. And I think if you're an informed or want to be an informed viewer, you really need to ask where you're getting your information, and you should ask if people are indeed making money from the cannabis industry. In order to get a better idea of what I was dealing with, I went and did get a certificate in Cannabis Science and Medicine so I could be more fully informed. So we can go to the next slide.
Okay. Well, while we go to the next slide, let me ask you, who is making money from the cannabis industry aside from the growers and the workers and the who else is making money from the cannabis industry? Is it politicians?
Well, several politicians are being well funded by the cannabis industry. There's a lot of lobbyists, a lot of funding going to Washington, a lot of funding going to senators. When you look at the cannabis industry itself, their basic employees are being paid minimum wage.
I want to kind of go into that a little later. So the Napa Valley of cannabis.
When all this started, our commissioner, Sal Pace, said he wanted to be known, Pueblo County wanted to be known as the Napa Valley of cannabis. And the pictures I have, this is my reality and it's my brother's reality. So the picture on the left is a picture of my neighbor. And this house was a known Cuban grow house, not once, but twice. And this is the SWAT team leaving the house 1 year ago in August after they busted the house again as a Cuban grow house. This house now sits empty with windows broken, and I have a neighbor who lives directly across the house. She can't sell her property because this house is still there. The picture on the right is my brother's house. He lives in Brighton, Colorado. The house is on fire. My brother's in the fire department there. And apparently this house is the $700,000 or $800,000 house in a nice community. But when they went to take care of the fire, all the basement windows were boarded up, and this house was an illegal grow. When the firemen see that the windows are boarded up, they can't enter the house to fight the fire, and the fire has to be fought from outside because there's no way to egress should there be a problem. And so this house basically burned to the ground. It was discovered to be an illegal grow with all kinds of alterations to the electrical system.
When you when you have a fire in a human grow facility, it's not just the marijuana and the contents of the home that are going up. It's also maybe the chemicals that are being used to process the new era marijuana.
Correct. There's all kinds of chemicals and pesticides being used. If it's an outdoor grow, the plants are known as scrubber plants, and they're really good at picking up the chemicals and the heavy metals from the soil. So all those things are involved.
Okay. And you mentioned this one home that's being raided by the SWAT officers. You said it was a Cuban operation.
Correct.
Okay. Tell me about that. Are foreign entities coming into Pueblo and Denver and other areas to grow?
With abandon. We have Mexican, Cuban, Russian, Chinese cartels. They're all over. The illegal market has blossomed since we legalized. This, for instance, my neighbor is a known Cuban cartel house, and they have at least 6 to 7 other houses in this area. There are probably over 40 known cartel houses in the Pueblo County area, maybe more.
Well, with the advent of these illegal grow centers in your neighborhood, if you wanted to sell your house today, could you do it? Or you'd have to take a big loss or something of that nature?
The lady who lives right across is a physician. She is actually an addiction physician, and she has her house for sale. And it's obviously not sold. If you were a person moving to this state and looking to buy a house and you had to look at this, the house now has broken windows and some boards across the bottom of the windows. You wouldn't want to put your family next to that. So obviously it has a lot to do with property values.
Okay. But aside from the illegal grow operations, which is a criminal activity, are you seeing other forms of crime on the upswing in the area where you live?
Oh, but yeah, there's a lot of vagrancy, there's a lot of homelessness, there's a lot of petty thefts, there's all kinds of low-level crimes that are happening here.
Okay. Well, let's move on to our next slide.
So a few of the basics, I think, so the viewer has a better understanding of really the difference between the Woodstock era or even the marijuana of the 1990s. In 1990 or at Woodstock, if you bought a joint, it would have 1 to 3 milligrams of THC. If you had a really good joint, it would be 3 milligrams of THC. Currently in Colorado, you can't buy a joint with less than 18 milligrams of THC. So you can purchase joints at the store, at the dispensary, but you can also purchase joints on the streets. And sometimes what we're seeing is these joints are called dippers, and the people who are selling them will dip them in methamphetamines or opiates, cocaine, to make the joint have more appeal. But if you buy a joint in Colorado and smoke it, the equivalent of smoking 18 joints from Woodstock, and you're doing it all at the same time. So there is no reduction in concentration, and I don't think you're going to have a reduction in harms by increasing the concentration so much. We can go to the next slide.
But you said you can't buy marijuana with less than 18% THC. So that's on the low end. There's a high end too, right?
Right, there is, and we'll talk about that. So
Yeah.
what we've seen are a whole bunch of new products coming on the market, and what the two major products that we're seeing are THC and CBD. And the cannabis plant has hundreds of chemicals. The most, probably the best known are THC and CBD. Both of these cross the blood-brain barrier. In previously plants that were grown, marijuana plants, they probably had a nearly equal concentration of THC and CBD. CBD is the typically not psychoactive, and they're actually, in fact, may be used for CBD because it does cross the blood-brain barrier. But right now, with medical science, we just don't have the research to know for sure if these are going to be beneficial. No CBD dispensary product sold in Colorado is free of THC. If you go into a dispensary and buy CBD, and I think there's a lot of people who believe that they can get CBD and it's THC free, it is not. There's a company in Europe that is making THC free CBD, but right now, every product that I know of that you purchase in the United States for CBD has THC, and the concentration is variable. CBD comes from the plant, from hemp. It's called Cannabis sativa. That's its scientific name. And in order to be defined as CBD, it has to contain less than 3% THC, but that percentage changes when you concentrate it to an oil or a dab. We can go to the next.
And okay, what's a dab?
We'll talk about that in a second. If you look at some of these are ads from the area here recently that have been out. The one on the left is a wheel made by Leafly, which is a big company here. And if you look at the products that they're talking about, all of these issues on the wheel are diseases that they say can be cured or treated by CBD and THC, including like Crohn's and diabetes, nausea. They can treat osteoporosis. There's no evidence scientifically that shows that this is happening. So it's really a lot of false advertising. If you look at the ad on the right, this was recently in our newspaper. If you look down in the lower left-hand corner, it says white buffalo tar stops seizures, which is spelled wrong, and treats cancer. And that's clearly false advertising. Ultimately, there may be some benefit for a few types of cancer with treatment with CBD, but right now, again, we don't have that. And to put that it treats cancer really misleads the general public. We can go to the next slide. So when we look at THC, the basic two are cannabis sativa and cannabis indica. Indica, you can remember because it's sedating and basically indica-couch is what everybody says. Sativa is supposed to be uplifting and energizing, so that they have a ton of different products based on concentrations of sativa and indica, depending on whether you want to be mellow or be indica-couch or be up and active. We can go to the next slide. THC is the psychoactive portion. It's the portion of the plant that everybody smokes to get the high. They have now been genetically modified so the plant itself increases the concentration of THC. But unfortunately, when we increase the concentration of THC in the plant itself, we're decreasing the percentage of CBD.
What are we looking at in this picture?
So this is a wax dab and shatter. The bottom one on the right is wax. The middle one is sugar wax, and the top is shatter. This is processed THC, so it goes through a series of extractions, sometimes with butane, sometimes with propane. And the final product, when you run it through and use butane to extract it, is really concentrated THC. The bottom right is called a dab, right there where the arrow is. That's called a dab, and people smoke that. They put it in a pipe and smoke it. A typical dab will have 90 milligrams, roughly, of THC. So if you smoke a dab and you smoke a whole dab, you're smoking 90 milligrams, which again, if we go back to Woodstock joints, is the equivalent of smoking. If you have 1 milligram joint from Woodstock, it's the equivalent of smoking 90 Woodstock joints.
I'm sorry, Doctor. So when people say that, you know, marijuana is a natural product and it's right from God's good earth, that it's grown from the ground. They're not telling you the whole story because of the way it's processed with these chemicals.
Correct. This is very ultra processed product. And I have people who tell me they smoke 5 grams a day. And why? Just simply because they can. It's legal and they can smoke that much. Or 2 grams a day, and that's 2,000 milligrams. We can go to the next slide. So these products are concentrated, and they've been made in all kinds of products. We have edibles, topicals, smokables, some products that the general public doesn't know about, including marijuana-infused tampons. We have, down on the right, lower left side, we have inhalers that are designed to deceive so that people can do an inhaler of marijuana. You can have marijuana energy drinks, patch, alcohol-infused marijuana. Go to the next slide. Now, the new thing most recently is that Coca-Cola said they were interested in thinking about putting hemp or CBD into their product. I think
What would they do? Why would they do that?
Because they claim it's healthy. Their response to us when we asked was they said it's healthy. But again, we go back to you don't have CBD without THC. So depending on the product, you have unknown concentration of THC. Coke's reply was that they weren't interested in cannabis, but again, hemp is cannabis. The scientific name of the plant is Cannabis sativa. So I hope that they don't go along with this product. I think it's a very sad statement that they are thinking about it. Let's go to the next slide. These are some of the products, and you can see some of the products look pretty appetizing. And one of the problems that we're seeing in the emergency department is if you're a child and you're looking at the brownie in the upper left-hand side, you don't know if that's marijuana infused. If you're looking at the gummy bears down on the bottom, which side of those gummy bears is marijuana infused? And if you're a child, you don't know. And if you look at the Swedish fish, if you look at the lower right hand, you can see all kinds of trademark products like Keef Cat and Butterfinger, where they have some, I would think, trademark infringement, but all made to look like candies, which would be very attractive to a child. And so what we see—
But wait a second, doctor. This marijuana that was legalized in Colorado was for adults 21 and older.
Right, but if you're 5 and your adult in your household has these products, you're not going to know. Let's go to the next slide. So what we've seen is now that if you just have to Google it, no one has to take my word for it. Google it. There are more and more reports of children who bring products to school, like the gummy bears or the gummy fish, and then classmates become ill. There was a dosing limit of 10 milligrams per serving, but I put this brownie picture in because this brownie has 1,000 milligrams. If you're 10 and you look at that brownie, you're not going to stop. So you're going to ingest 1,000 milligrams of THC. If you take it out of the packaging, it doesn't look any different than a regular product. And this is why this is where kids are coming in with ingestions, mostly accidental in the younger kids, because the product is out of the package and looks like a brownie, so you consume the whole thing. I had a 15-year-old boy who was at one of the conferences who said he went to school and his friend offered him a brownie. Well, he likes brownies. He's 15. It was a cannabis brownie, and he ended up having problems related to that, but he didn't know.
Well, having problems, what kind of problems? And
he became acutely intoxicated. Like hallucinations and intoxication.
Oh my. And how long does that last?
Depends on the person, but if you're talking about a naive person, it could be 12 hours, 10 to 12 hours. We can go to the next slide.
Next slide.
So one of the big problems I see is with edibles. Once you eat an edible, you can't control what happens. It varies from person to person because it goes through first pass metabolism in the liver. So what we frequently see is people who eat edibles don't wait long enough to see if there's an effect and eat more. I can give a quick story. It was a family coming from Texas to go skiing, and they had their child in the car, and they took a child's friend. They stopped as soon as they got to the border. They stopped and purchased edibles. And one of the parents started taking edibles, but didn't wait long enough, which happens frequently, continued to take more edibles, and then became acutely psychotic in the car that was going down the highway, and ended up in our emergency department. And she got through it, did well, but ultimately, exposed her children and her spouse to an acute psychotic episode in the car. The elderly are also really susceptible, and the elderly are being promised all kinds of cures and treatments, as we saw on the previous wheel, the leaf fly wheel, with all the diseases that it treats. A few of the promises are that it treats Parkinson's, treats Alzheimer's, treats cancer. The American Neurologic Society does not recommend it. The Alzheimer's Society does not recommend marijuana in treatment of disease. However, even here, in doing some outreach talks, I talked to a nurse who was working in a small outlying city that said she couldn't get neurologists. So she was recommending that her elderly vulnerable patients or their families go to the marijuana store and buy THC products. So I asked her, I said, as the nurse, what dose do you recommend? And she shook her head, she didn't know. And I said, do you send your patients with a list of medications? Because even now we're realizing there's more and more and more medication interactions with CBD and THC. And she said, no. And I said, so in essence, you're turning the care of a vulnerable patient over to a bud tender who probably doesn't have any medical training. And that's the reality of what we're seeing here. We can go to the next slide. There's been a big thing in the media about marijuana deaths, or marijuana can be used to overcome opioids. That is categorically not the case. These are from Colorado Department of Public Health. They're available online. We can see on the bottom right-hand graph the number of deaths for 2016. I have the first half of 2018. We are on record to have the highest number of opioid deaths since we've been reporting them since 2012. So it is not actually helping the opioid crisis. In fact, I believe it's making it worse. Let's go to the next slide.
Let's talk about that for a second. Okay. I was at a meeting with a couple of state lawmakers, and we were discussing the potential for legalization of today's high-potency marijuana here in Illinois. And they were telling me that, well, we have this opioid crisis in America. It's hitting Illinois very hard. And maybe one of the answers is the legalization of marijuana. And you're saying, no way, no how.
All they have to do is go to the Department of Health. It's very difficult to find, but our number of opioid deaths has increased steadily since legalization, and we certainly have a wide abundance of marijuana in the environment, and yet our opioid deaths are going up. That's very easily it's very easy to find the information if you go to the Colorado Department of Health. You don't have to trust me. And again, like I said, the new statistics is that Colorado is online to have a record number of opioid deaths in 2018.
So the people who are using these opioids there in Colorado, at least, are they also using marijuana?
Yes, I would say, yeah. They're using a combination of drugs. Let's go to the next slide. So these are just some informational slides. So before we get into this, I have been doing a longitudinal study in my emergency department where I look at urine drug screens of everybody that we do a urine drug screen on. I have a total of over 40,000 drug screens at this point. I started this study in 2013 and it goes on to today. I've seen an increase in all drug usage overall. Again, these are people that are coming to the emergency department. We usually do drug screens for people who have altered mental status, who are traumas, or come with a psychiatric issues. So those three reasons. In 2013, the pretest probability of having a positive drug screen was about 45%. Now in 2018, for the first 7 months of 2018, the average percentage of positive drug screens is 65%. And the most disturbing thing I've seen is I think that our methamphetamine use has tripled since 2013. So not only are we seeing all drugs usage go up, but we're seeing an increase in methamphetamines as well.
So, wait. All drug use is going up?
Correct. In our environment, it is. Correct.
In your environment, okay.
In our county.
Okay. Would that be the case, let's say, in Washington State or California, too?
I would
where the
say
laws are a little stricter, maybe.
I would say yes. I don't have their statistics offhand, but I would hazard a guess that that's the same there too. If we look, no one has to take my word for it. These are recent. One is from the Denver Post that overdoses are overwhelming. This is from 2018. This is recent. We would expect and anticipate that if marijuana was the answer to opioids, that we would see a dramatic decrease, and we're not. We're back seeing an increase. The other thing that we've seen here is that locally, I know our governor believes that the youth usage has gone down, but youth usage has really gone up. And what we're seeing is attendance problems. So if you Google Pueblo District 60 school districts and chronic absenteeism, you'll see that there's a substantial problem. 27% of our kids were absent chronically in 2017. A quarter of our kids were chronically absent from high school. 2 years ago in the 8th grade, 47% of kids were chronically absent. These kids aren't in school to take the Healthy Kids survey to show drug usage. These kids aren't there. I was recently talking to a member of law enforcement, and for Pueblo schools, our graduation rate is somewhere around 50 to 60%. It's really shocking and alarming, and somehow these statistics aren't making it known to the public, although it's out there in the news. This is the Fox News article on the right-hand side. Okay. We can go to the next slide. This is a little bit brief about my research, and it's just what I talked about, that we're seeing incredible use altogether. Use is up, so we can go to the next slide. Specifically what we're seeing, hyperemesis. This is severe nausea and vomiting associated with chronic cannabinoid use. These people come in and they can come repeatedly to the emergency department. They get repeated lab work, CT scans. Some of them can throw up enough that they end up in the unit. Once they have this, the only treatment of choice is they have to stop using marijuana. We don't know who's going to get it, and we don't know why some people do, but when they do, the only treatment is to really stop using. There's a man in hospice here because he won't stop using cannabinoids, and he's wasting away because of the hyperemesis associated with it. We're seeing acute psychosis like never before. These people are incredibly violent, and it's usually associated with high-dose THC. I'll give an example. We had a young man who was in his teens. He went on vacation back east, and he had a psychotic episode there. There's no family history of psychosis. There was no personal history in this patient of psychosis. He was brought back because the parents didn't feel that he was safe to travel on an airplane, so they drove him back from back east. He was seen in the emergency department and admitted to an adolescent unit. He had another psychotic episode and attacked 3 healthcare workers and stabbed a security guard. Because we don't have resources for treatment, he was only inpatient for a couple of weeks, and he was out and attacked some more people with another acute psychotic episode. Again, there was no family history of psychiatric illness. There was no history of psychosis in this patient, and the only thing he ever tested positive for ever was THC. And we're seeing that.
Well, what do you consider a high dose of THC?
I consider a single blunt of 18 milligrams high dose, but you have these kids who are smoking dabs that are 90 milligrams.
Oh my. Yeah.
So we're seeing more. The earlier you use, the more likely you are to have psychosis. It can precipitate schizophrenia, and the studies are out. They're not conclusive, but we know there's an increased incidence of schizophrenia, as well as if you're using as a youth, there's anywhere between 10 and 34%, depending on the literature that you look at, will become addicted. That's a pretty high percentage, and the younger you use, the more likely you are to become addicted, which is why we recommend that people don't use till after the age of 25, because there are also changes that happen in your brain if you're using at an earlier age, and it's well documented that you can lose IQ points. When we talk about overdoses and ingestions, we're seeing this both in the pediatric and adult population. I saw some elderly men who came to Colorado specifically to try cannabis for their Parkinson's. They ended up eating too much and having issues. Both of them were seen in the emergency department. When we talk about contaminants, so the marijuana plant itself is a good soil scrubber. In fact, they used it in Chernobyl to help clean up the soil. But what happens is these contaminants become incorporated into the plant and then are extracted down. And if you're consuming the plant, you're consuming these contaminants. Some of the things we're seeing are heavy metals, pesticides, chemicals, and they all become into the person who's using it. They all get it incorporated. There's a recent case report of a man who was smoking cannabis for his cancer, and he ended up dying of an atypical fungus related to a product or contamination of his marijuana. We're seeing cardiovascular issues. There's a marked increase in the potential for heart attack or cardiovascular side effects within the first hour of use. I've seen people in their teens. There's a case report of a person who was in their teens who had an acute MI within an hour of use of marijuana. We're also seeing pregnancy issues, and we know without a doubt that use in pregnancy decreases the fetus IQ up to 8 points. We know that there's long-term issues related to the fetus when the mom uses, and we've seen a marked increase in the number of pregnant women who are using. There was a recent study in Colorado done by the University of Colorado where they called medical dispensaries, so medical cannabis, and asked what they should use for pregnancy, nausea, and 69% of them recommended that they use cannabis products. That's 70% recommending that pregnant women use cannabis products when we know it's harmful. There's clearly no question that use while pregnant is harmful.
Well, why would they do that? Why would they recommend that when I don't get it? When all the evidence shows it could be a danger to the unborn child.
I think it comes down to money. I mean, you can't sell your product. If you think about it, we have tons and tons of businesses that are manufacturing marijuana, and the price per pound has gone down a lot here in marijuana, or here in Colorado. And so the only way you can recoup some of your costs is if more people buy your product. And the only way that happens is if you have more people using your product. And I don't know why they would recommend use in pregnancy. There are some believers. We have a system called the endocannabinoid system. These are receptors that we all are born with that happen to fit the same as endocannabinoids, and we're probably misnamed. But there are people who believe that those receptor systems aren't open unless you use marijuana in pregnancy or in infancy. I disagree. I think there are plenty of people who did not have their endocannabinoid system opened, as they say, without having issues. So I think there are those people that believe that that would happen if they use in pregnancy.
And doctor, I understand that speaking of like cardiac issues and maybe lung issues, for your patients that are using marijuana, you're encouraging them to switch from smoking marijuana to the edibles, but they're not doing that because the edibles are more expensive. Tell us.
Well, a lot of people don't like the edibles because I had someone tell me it's like being on a roller coaster. You don't exactly know when the ride's going to start, but once it does, you're on that ride until the end. That's how people refer to edibles, because when you consume it, you really don't know exactly when that high is going to start. And then you can't control how high you get. If you're smoking a dab, you can stop smoking that if you're getting too high, and that's not the case with edibles. I'm not sure about expense with edibles. To be honest with you, I don't know that.
Okay.
But the reason I understand is because edibles are a high that you can't control. And then again, once you're on it, you can't stop it.
Are we looking at down the road, maybe 5-10 years from now, with so many people smoking marijuana, a new epidemic of lung cancer?
My feeling is yes. I feel like no medication should be smoked. Not only are you, I mean, when 5 or 10 years ago, when the vape pens came out, everybody was like, "Oh, it's natural and it's okay." And now we're seeing that it isn't actually okay, right? Where there's more problems with vaping the chemicals, and we'll see that with the high concentrate THC. I mean, some people are using a blowtorch to light their dabs, and it can't be healthy for your lungs. And right now, people have never ever smoked cannabis in the concentration and the quantity and the daily use that they are using right now. And so 5 to 10 years from now, I do believe we're going to see a substantial issue of substantial lung problems.
This is noweedillinois.com. I'm Monty Larrick, joined by Dr. Karen Randall, ND. She's an emergency room physician in Pueblo, Colorado, and she holds a certificate in Cannabis Science and Medicine from the University of Vermont. Doctor, first of all, are you done with your presentation? Or are there more?
I think the last thing that I would say is that there are a lot of people who would be pro-pot advocates, and you really have to know what their interest is. Ask them for disclosure before you believe what they're saying.
Okay.
What is your interest? Do you own stock in the pot company? Do you have a grow? Does your sister have a grow? That kind of thing. Because a lot of people are in it for the money.
Okay. Let me ask you this too. Is the federal government, in a sense, subsidizing the marijuana industry through Medicaid and what have you?
Oh, there's no question that they're subsidizing. Every single industry worker that I've ever seen, with the exception of one person, has been on Medicaid. So there's no question. I had the opportunity to tour a grow about a week and a half ago. And the owner of the grow came up to the tour. I toured with the police department tour. He came up in a brand new Audi SUV Quattro, and through his tour, he had identified several people who were his employees. And then I asked, "Do you get benefits?" And he goes, "No, we can't afford that." So all of his employees were on Medicaid.
All of them on Medicaid.
Right.
And Colorado also has very liberal social services, very generous social services. And your taxpayers are subsidizing these people who are hooked on marijuana.
And part of what I think happened in Colorado, and it was very unforeseen, is we had a tsunami of people moving to Colorado, and they were bringing all their medical issues and their social issues with them. I mean, they were moving to Colorado for a number of reasons, but we have very liberal social services. You have to be here 31 days. You can sign up for a Medicaid expansion state. And people were moving here like crazy. We have an agency called Posada. In 2013, they serviced 25 homeless individuals. By 2016, they had 7,500 new individuals requesting services for homelessness. Posada had to close or change what they do because it became overwhelming. There was no way to provide those services. Low-income housing here in Pueblo is at 99% occupancy. We don't have any low-income housing. We see homeless people living in campers in Walmart, homeless people living on the streets or down by the river, and all those issues that they bring with them. They bring mental health issues, they bring crime issues, they bring medication issues, and the medical community is really overwhelmed. We have 110,000 people in Pueblo itself. Roughly about 69,000 of them are on Medicaid. So in order to recruit providers, it's very difficult because of the payer mix. So we have that issue. We don't actually currently have a homeless shelter here. So I don't know what we'll do with our homeless people. There's a thought that somebody might buy a building and convert one. We're hoping that happens by November, but we don't have currently a homeless shelter for our people here. We have a very difficult time offering services. We have a soup kitchen that was serving 50 to 100 meals a day. They're now serving over 200 a day. So services are being really requested, and we're having a very difficult time meeting this. We can't recruit, or it's been very difficult to recruit primary care providers to the area. So what's happened is that now more people are using the emergency services as a safety net for the community, and that has increased our wait times. Our hospital is now at over 100% occupancy almost daily. There were 2 hospitals in the area. One hospital is drastically reducing services, again, because they couldn't afford to keep it open.
So what's that meant for the people of Pueblo who don't use marijuana, and what's that done to their health care? Are they kind of being left out there high and dry because the folks who are using marijuana?
Well, unfortunately, yes. If you're the little old lady with the GI bleed and you come to the ER, you're going to sit in the waiting room for hours while the acutely psychotic person who's screaming in company of 6 police officers needs to be seen immediately. So getting follow-up appointments, we've had a difficulty getting specialty care and specialty service in the area. So if you're an average person, trying to get follow-up appointments with specialty care has become very difficult. So it's really hurt our services. I don't think a city like Denver, where there are more providers, would see that as much as we would, but we're 2 hours south of Denver, so we're kind of, it's our own community, and we're having a hard time recruiting providers.
So if Illinois goes ahead and legalizes this new era, high potency, turbo marijuana, if you want to call it that, there'll be some communities in downstate Illinois that are going to be hard hit, and they'll have a hard time providing the medical services that people need because of marijuana.
Correct. And there's no question, and we can see it here. The number of marijuana retail stores and dispensaries in Pueblo is over 2 times the amount of Starbucks plus McDonald's in our area. The Pueblo has always been a blue-collar community. It's not ever been a really wealthy community, and the number of retail and dispensary marijuana shops is just exploded here in our community. Whereas if you look at the other communities, Aspen, Vale, Cherry Creek, some of the very much more affluent communities, they don't have marijuana shops there. So we're looking at it's almost like the distribution of alcohol stores. They tend to be more concentrated in lower economic areas, and that's the same for the marijuana stores. So it's totally affecting the community as a whole.
And these jobs being created at these facilities that grow marijuana or sell marijuana, they're not high-paying jobs. And you've mentioned already many of the workers are on Medicaid, but the owners are getting rich.
Right. Again, the people who own the grows, they will talk about how they have to pay excise taxes and this kind of tax, and they're not making money, but they are making enough money. The typical bud tender or grow person is not making more than minimum wage, I would hazard. Although it's very difficult to actually get those real numbers because it's a cash and carry business.
Yeah. What about these homeless camps near Pueblo? They're essentially marijuana homeless camps, right? I would think that with what's going on, that you have the potential of epidemics and what have you in these areas.
Well, they're not just marijuana homeless camps. I think they may start out that way. We've had a number of people who tell me they moved so they could smoke pot. And I think that people anticipated they would grow their own marijuana. Growing conditions aren't really good here because we're a high desert climate. And so people moving here to grow their own marijuana didn't work out. They end up homeless because a lot of the people left Oklahoma or other states. looking for that job. There are minimal jobs available in the dispensaries and grows. Those jobs are already filled. They're being paid at minimum wage. And yes, we have homeless camps now. I think they're polysubstance homeless camps. They are at risk for all the communicable diseases that you would see. There's a very large homeless camp in Pueblo that's living on a Superfund site. They're living in slag caves. And so, of course, they're exposed to all that.
Oh, my goodness. From your own perspective here, not necessarily as a doctor, but do you feel less safe while driving now that Colorado has legalized recreational pot?
I'll just say this. I was driving down the highway and saw a man with a face mask, a gas mask with a hose hooked to a bomb.
Oh, my. Was he texting while he was doing this?
Probably on the phone and texting, but he had a gas mask hooked to a bomb while he was driving. So I guess I don't feel safer.
Don't feel safer.
Yeah.
Well, I asked a couple of lawmakers just the other day about that. If Illinois goes ahead and legalizes recreational marijuana, will our roads be less safe? And they could not give me an answer.
Well, there's no question the amount of DUIs are up. That's public knowledge. It's public information. There's no question that DUIs are up here.
DUIs are up here in Colorado as a result of marijuana. So you're trained in pediatrics, and you've touched on this, but the whole aspect of pregnant moms, babies, and marijuana. Well, the long-term results there just can't be good.
I think, no, and I don't think anybody in medicine really knows what the true long-term results will be, because we've never seen THC or marijuana products with such high concentrations before. So kind of we're entering this new era where we don't really know what's going to happen, but we do know from several studies from years ago that there are definite harms to a fetus. If you're a fetus and your mom uses while you're in utero, you can lose a certain number of IQ points. If you go on to use when you're a teen, you lose even more, up to a standard deviation. So if you're a person who has an average IQ of 110 and you lose a whole standard deviation, now you put yourself into the category where you're handicapped.
Well, with all this incriminating evidence against legalizing today's high-potency marijuana, why do you think lawmakers are so willing to make it legal? Why do you think that is? Is it the money, or do they think this is just a quick fix to the opioid crisis? What do you think is working here?
I think it's the money. It can't be anything else. We know it's not a quick fix. We've informed our lawmakers. We know that there are hundreds of marijuana industry lobbyists in DC, and they have the money to really reach the politicians. We've been trying to contact them to share the harms, to share the issues that we're seeing, and somehow people are still running to pass legalization when we know that there are so many issues here in Colorado, so many issues. And even Governor Hickenlooper said it's a great social experiment. But in an experiment, you actually care about the outcome, and the outcome here is not good. It needs to be better regulated. The concentration needs to be decreased. We are going to create a whole bunch of new people with addiction problems. The industry's response is that we already have big tobacco and we have alcohol. So what's marijuana? And it's, my response is that we don't need another problem. And when we talk about the tax revenue that a state will make, the marijuana taxes are 0.42% of Colorado's GDP. They're almost negligible. The marijuana tax revenue that we make as discretionary funds, this is the way it was built into our state constitution. That means that the leadership can decide where those funds are spent. Our county commissioner on the first year decided that the golf clubs or the golf carts needed to be bought and purchased. So for the area's golf place, he purchased new golf carts with the discretionary funds from the marijuana tax dollars. Meanwhile, our schools are suffering. Our teachers had to strike last year to get a 2% pay raise. The police will tell you, you just have to ask a police officer in the state of Colorado, how's it going for you? They'll tell you they're overwhelmed. They can't deal with all the number of illegal grows, all the number of petty crime and small crimes, and deal with the other crimes too. They're overwhelmed and they're not seeing the benefit from the revenue either. So while they say we're going to legalize this for the tax revenue, if we look at history, the country never got rich by selling tobacco. We could not make enough tax to cover the harms of tobacco. There's no question about that. The country is not getting rich from all the alcohol sales. We're not certainly blossoming and improving because we have alcohol on sale. And so if you look at those two, it's not going to be different with marijuana, and so far it hasn't been.
Right. So you're saying that the social, the medical cost, and all the other related cost of legal recreational marijuana outweigh the tax revenue and the job creation in Colorado.
Oh, far and above outweigh. It's not different for tobacco and for the alcohol system. If you look at just the medical expenses alone, I saw 2 young women who were burned in a hash oil fire, and they were both there back to Denver. They both spent months in the burn unit, and even just their care alone will exceed any revenue that we made here in Pueblo.
Well, Doctor, what advice do you have for voters here in Illinois who are concerned about marijuana? What should they be telling their lawmakers about this? If they need to drive home just 2 or 3 key points to their lawmakers, what would you suggest?
First and foremost, be informed. I see a lot of people here say, wow, we passed this law and we had no idea. Be informed, because now we're sharing this information and we do have an idea and we're sharing it with everybody. So the voter and the politician need to be informed, and not just hearing from one side. So don't just hear from the tax dollars or the money for the lobbyists from the marijuana industry, but talk to the people, talk to the police officers here, talk to medical professionals here, talk to the teachers here. Be informed. Number one, first and foremost, be informed.
Be informed. Okay, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Doctor, if people would like to get better informed or more informed, and they'd like to maybe connect with you, what can they do?
They can email me, and my email is my name, 15405@me.com. I'd appreciate not being spammed. Don't want to have any arguments with people on email about the benefits of marijuana. I'm very educated with regards to what potential benefits there are. So I'm not going to debate anybody on the benefits of marijuana. I know people will want to tell anecdotal stories about grandma getting better on marijuana, but the reality is the research doesn't show that yet. We're not there. Medical research is not there yet. And when we're there, I'm happy to say maybe there's something beneficial for this, but we're not there yet.
And here again, you've talked about this earlier, but let's just drive home the point. Recreational marijuana is not the answer to the opioid crisis.
It is not the answer. It is categorically 100% not the answer. We can show it in numbers. You just go to the Department of Health, look it up. We're on track to have a record number of opioid deaths here in Colorado. And that's despite changing how we prescribe, limiting what we can prescribe. We're a record number. So it's not the answer.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Karen Randall. God bless you and your work. And thank you for tuning in to NoWeedIllinois.com. Remember, please ask your state lawmakers to vote no on legalizing today's high-potency marijuana. If you'd like to contact the state Capitol switchboard, the phone number is 217-782-2000, and ask your state lawmaker to vote no on legalizing today's high-potency marijuana. Till next time, God bless.